As you know, Seib is a Qatari national insurance and reinsurance company. Our strategy is based on the main guiding principle of offering quality products and services to our customers. Customer satisfaction is a top priority for us. That's why once it comes to the service, Seib is considered to be the first choice company. We can provide customized, comprehensive, and competitive programs and products which can assist our customers. Seib has consistent and seamless approach to the claims management. Our team is high experienced risk control professionals which are capable to handle complex claims and assist our customers efficiently. Our dedicated claim professionals and products and industry-specific underwriting provides superior solutions to your business insurance needs. Seib is also specialized in assisting customers to reduce their risks and meet their insurance objectives. As you know, for construction claims, it is not only CAR or EAR which can cause losses, but there are many other risks which can also affect the construction claims. And Seib although offers a very competitive edge to our customers' business needs, but we can also provide very innovative insurance solutions to our customers. Although Seib can offer a wide range of insurance products, but the following are our main lines of business. We start with the engineering insurance, which is more relevant to the topic of today. So under engineering insurance, Seib can cover construction all risks insurance, erection all risks insurance, contractors, plants and machinery insurance, electronic equipment insurance, machinery breakdown insurance, loss of profits due to machinery breakdown, inherent defects insurance. There is another class which is also very much linked with the professional lines, and this is also associated with the construction losses. Under the professional lines of business, we do cover professional indemnity insurance. We also cover directors and officers liability insurance. Property insurance is another class of business under which we can cover property all risks insurance, fire and allied perils insurance, and home insurance, which is mainly for the retail customers. Marine insurance, which covers marine cargo and marine hull insurance. We also cover motor insurance, and under motor we have two main classes, which is the comprehensive insurance and the third-party liability insurance. Casualty lines of business, we have GTPL, which is the general third-party liability insurance, products liability insurance, workman compensation insurance, and employers liability insurance. Miscellaneous accident class of business covers money insurance, which is mainly the cash and safe and cash in transit. We do have fidelity guarantee insurance, and we can also cover personal accident insurance. For more information about our services, you may visit to our official websites www.seibinsurance.com or call us at 00974 4402 6888. While we move forward to the main topic of this webinar, I would like to also mention that although it is impossible to cover every topic of the construction claims through this session, however, we have chosen few complex claims samples which will be presenting shortly by our guest Francis Barber, through which you will have a fair idea how loss adjusters as well as the legal perspective, how they interact while dealing with the complex claims of the insurance. So I hand over the screen to our first guest, Mr. Francis Barber, and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope now everybody is able to see this presentation, and I hope that the internet line will hold up. I've been asked by Seib Insurance to address you this afternoon on the handling of a number of complex construction claims which might illustrate Hang on, is this working? Ah, good. Okay, and this is working. Okay, sorry. Seib asked me to address you this afternoon on a number of complex construction claims, which I've chosen a selection of things that have really happened to us. I hope that they will illustrate some of the problems that may occur in real life when trying to apply the policy to the loss that you're facing. I have tried to anonymize these claims, but if any of you in the audience recognize any of them, I'd be grateful if you would maintain a discreet silence on that topic. First of all, I want to talk to you about a power station. In this case, here it is, probably one of the last coal-fired power stations to be constructed. It stands beside the sea, which it uses as cooling water. And in this low building here, there's the generator and turbine. And this big building here, which is the size of a decent story block of flats, it's about 90 meters high, is the boiler. Now, this project was constructed under a package policy which combined CAR, EAR, and delay in startup. Now, for those of you not familiar with that, the delay in startup cover is purely to cover the client's potential loss of profit if there's a delay in commissioning the plant, but it doesn't cover the contractor. The first thing that they suffered during coal commissioning was a failure of the transformer. There's only one transformer for the whole project, and without that they couldn't commission, so it was a bit of a crisis. This transformer had a severe problem, and it was decided it would have to go back to Siemens to be examined. Here it is on a giant transporter, two 13-wheel tractors carrying it back to the Siemens works. It's the heaviest one Siemens ever made. It's about 500 tons. When they got it back to the factory, Siemens said, this is a really severe problem. We're going to have to strip it down and rebuild it, and that's going to take 11 months. So here we were, in the middle of a major project, facing now a delay of nearly a year. So everybody felt very exposed. The gross profit per day that was threatened was about €500,000. So everybody was pretty anxious because we're facing €150 million loss, possibly. The contractor did what he could. He rented some temporary generators in order to try and keep things going a little bit, but the client was the real star here. They found a spare transformer at a sister company, which they purchased, and although it was only 50% of the damaged transformer in capacity, it was enough to carry on almost all the commissioning, and effectively this reduced what was potentially an 11-month delay to pretty much zero. Even better, when it was all over, they sold the transformer back for not a lot less than they bought it for. So the total cost of this loss mitigation, this delay mitigation measure, was about €1.2 million. And it had been pretty much completely successful. But the debate then fell to who should pay for this. Everybody said, well, Mr. Contractor, it's mitigated a delay for which you would otherwise be responsible, 11 months of liquidated damages. It's really yours. And the contractor said, actually, this is not my loss. And indeed, if it had been, it would have been a bit awkward for the contractor because a lot of policies have only quite limited cover for this sort of thing. Normally they have cover for expediting expenses, but that's really for expediting the repair, and it covers things like overtime working, nighttime working, air freight and things like that. Some policies have extra expense which covers contractors for a lot of the things that they might do to try and salvage the schedule in their project. But this contractor didn't have that. But he said, I don't need that. He said, this isn't my delay. He said, I didn't choose a Siemens transformer, Mr. Employer, you did. And it seems that this problem that we've got is due to an internal manufacturing fault. It wasn't anything we did. So this delay is not our responsibility. And that was a pretty good argument to which nobody had an answer. So then the employer fell to debating this with their insurer. And the employer said, look, we've done this thing and we've saved 11 months delay, which you'd have had to pay for. Please, can you fund this loss mitigation measure? And the employer said, yes, but please remember that if we hadn't been able to avoid this delay, you, Mr. Client, would have paid the deductible, which is 90 days. So, effectively we saved approximately 300 days. So you saved 90 days and we've saved 210 days. And so the decision was taken that the cost would be split pro rata to the exposure, which is, in my view, above the correct and the fair way of doing things. That poor project went on to have a whole lot of other losses. The contractors' liquidated damages were fully expended in the end, but one of the most severe losses that they faced was a problem in the condenser underneath the steam turbine. This is a clever device that takes the steam from the steam turbine, passes it over these tubes which are filled with cold seawater, and it goes back. Steam condenses to water at the bottom and is pumped back into the boiler. And it's very important that this water that goes round and round, steam, boiler to turbine, to condenser to boiler, is very, very pure, because otherwise it can cause corrosion. And they had an accident during commissioning. Luckily, they weren't putting steam through the boiler, to a turbine at that point, but inside the condenser, this steel plate, which protected a sensor that was measuring pressure, I think, fell off and damaged one of these tubes. And as a consequence, seawater leaked out and got into that water cycle that was supposed to be so pure. So a lot of panic, but they imported a lot of clean, demineralized water from another plant. They washed through the condenser and they washed through the boiler, and they believed that they pretty much controlled the problem, and they continued commissioning. However, in the ensuing weeks and months, they had a series of little leaks in the boiler. Here we are high up in that square block of flats. In the bottom of the block of flats, they're burning coal dust at very high temperatures, and the hot flue gases rise up over these pipes, inside which is the water that's turned to steam, or in some cases, steam that's made into even hotter steam. And they had a series of sort of pinhole leaks on the corners here, and they kept having to shut down the boiler and send in specialised welders who would cut out the little pinhole and weld in a new section of pipe. But the contractor was pretty confident that they got this all under control, and he said, we've pretty much finished commissioning. Please, can we have handover? And the client said, we don't think this is a simple problem. We think you've got a really serious problem here. And the client put in a whole lot of specialists to carry out a very thorough investigation. And they concluded that actually that seawater incident had given rise to accelerated stress corrosion, pitting corrosion, in 3 of these big panels of tubes hung in the top of the boiler. And these are the hottest panels at the highest pressures, and therefore they're made out of very special stainless steels. And once you've got pitting corrosion, just rinsing out the boiler wouldn't have stopped it. So the client said, actually, he said, we need to replace all 3 of these panels. So the problem started back in January 2014. Up until September 2014, the contractor was saying, we can do this, we can do this, we can fix this with local repairs, please give us handover. But by June 2015, everybody was reconciled to the fact that no, it was a serious problem. They'd have to replace all 3 panels in the boiler. Now, the problem is, as I said, those are very special stainless steels. There are only 2 companies in the world that make this stuff. One's in Japan and one's in Germany. And once you've got this special stainless steel, this block of stainless steel that you've ordered, you then have to make it into sheets and then weld it up into tubes. And it's so hard, you need special equipment for that. So the lead time for getting new tubing for this boiler was 10 months. And after that, they would have had to take 7.5 months to take out the 3 panels, old panels, put in the 3 new panels, and reassemble all the bits of the boiler around it and recommission it. And so here was a big power project, one of the biggest, about to go into service, and suddenly everybody's facing a 17.5-month delay. This led to a lot of very, very difficult discussions and negotiations between all the parties. But the client said, Mr. Insurer, I'm prepared to operate this station on a commercial basis, even with a damaged boiler, on the understanding that if it all goes wrong, you're going to help me out. But in order to go into commercial operation, the client needed an operational policy. And of course, the operational insurers didn't want to take on a plant that was damaged. The contractor didn't have any liquidated damages left, but he needed a handover to release him from a series of very expensive bonds. So what was done was the client agreed with the contractor that they would give a conditional handover, which was backdated, and that it was conditional on the fact that this was a damaged boiler and that the contractor would have to come back after 10 months and carry out the repairs. At that point, therefore, the CAR policy could all end and the operational insurers could pick it up. The client needed the operational insurance because without that, he couldn't go into commercial production. However, it was clearly understood by all parties that if during this 10 months the boiler failed due to these corrosion problems, the operational policy would not respond to that. It would be the CAR insurers. So although the CAR insurance had technically stopped, it actually continued silently and stepped back in during the 7.5-month outage period during which the operational policy wasn't going to be functioning. So we had a very, very difficult situation. A 17.5-month loss was reduced to a 7.5-month loss, so we saved more than 50%. But it only worked because all the parties took a very cooperational approach and were each prepared to accept some part of this risk. And when the contractor finally did remobilize to carry out the repairs, he had to remobilize almost as big a workforce as he had to build the station, and it cost around 40 million euros just for the repair. Now I'd like to talk to you about a tunnel boring machine, because this example illustrates claims that were both paid and unpaid, and it illustrates some rather fundamental principles that underlie all insurance policies, and that can give rise to difficulties in real life. This is a tunnel boring machine. It's a big one. It's 13.7 meters in diameter, and it was built specifically for this project, which was to construct a motorway tunnel underneath a very busy international shipping lane. And after it launched, it's got this big rotating head on the front. After it was launched, it went well for just under a month or so, and then suddenly it stopped making any progress. And so everybody diagnosed there must be something going wrong inside this rotating cutter head. Very difficult ground conditions. They had to put the front of the machine under compressed air and send in engineering divers who found that there'd been real severe erosion around the perimeter of this cutting head. And it was diagnosed that the warning systems inside the cutters that would have warned the client that a problem was developing didn't function correctly. And so things had been allowed to get into this terrible state. So it was an accident. It was covered by the insurance policy. The divers carried out a very skillful repair, welding in these cylindrical sections that allowed the cutter pieces to be bolted back on, and the machine then continued. And it made incredibly good progress. Well, I say that. There were problems along the way. There were other machinery breakdown problems. The machinery was damaged by bits of steel getting wedged inside and things like that, all of which were covered by insurance and paid, but the machine still made immensely good progress. And here it is emerging the other side of the shipping lane into the reception box. And when you look at that, you would say, that looks pretty good. However, not long afterwards, the client contacted the insurer to say, it's not very good. This machine has actually suffered terribly bad wear and tear, and it's going to cost us 13.7 million euros to fix it. And please, would you pay us? They said, we started taking apart the machine. We took that rotating cutter head off. We've taken the top part of the machine off. But look, you see this leading edge here, look, it's all eroded around the bottom. We've lost half the leading edge. It's buckled and dented. The sides of the machine have suffered an enormous loss of thickness of the metal, which is going to cost an awful lot of money to fix. We were expecting to refurbish this thing for maybe a couple of million and use it on another project, and it's just now uneconomic. Here's the rotating cutting head we took off to have a look at it, and now if you look at it, you'll see there are these terrible erosion in all the cutting tools, and it's just uneconomic. We want, please can we have 13.7 million to put us back in the position we should have been in. So we recruited an expert to come and look at this, and he said, you know, when you consider the distance the machine has travelled, the really good progress it made, the incredibly abrasive nature of the rock. He said, even here on the cutting rim of the cutting wheel, where you carried out that brilliant underground repair, it has eroded, but it's really nothing more than you would expect for a machine that's been through that kind of ground. There's nothing unexpected here. And so the insurers said there isn't anything for us to respond to. And at that point, the client said, no, you don't understand. We had intended to stop this machine every 100 meters during the drive and get in and change all the tools on the front. And if we'd done that, there wouldn't have been all this erosion. But in fact, we found that the ground was so bad that if we wanted to stop the machine and get into the front, we'd have had to treat the ground ahead with grout, and we would still have had to use compressed air, and we'd have had to use engineering divers, and we'd all taken an enormous amount of time, and it would have cost an awful lot of money. So we decided we just couldn't do that. We had to keep going. And we were very lucky. The machine made it right through to the end. And at that point, the insurer said, I'm sorry, your insurance policy pays for accidents. You had accidents that damaged the machine, and we paid for those. You found yourself in bad ground. The policy does not insure the ground conditions for you. You know, you have to take what you find in terms of ground conditions. You found you're in bad ground and you made a commercial decision to keep going with the machine. The policy just can't respond to that. And you can imagine how deeply difficult all those discussions were. I want to talk to you now about a diaphragm wall, because it kind of illustrates what is considered by insurers to be damage and what is not. Many of you watching this will probably know how a diaphragm wall is made, but for those of you who don't, you use a piece of equipment like this suspended from a crane, and it's a frame with a couple of rotating cutters at the base, and you lower it slowly into the ground, and it cuts out a deep, narrow slot. And you keep that slot filled while you're cutting it with mud, special bentonite mud, which helps to stabilize the walls of the soil that you're excavating in and stop them from collapsing. And once you've reached the depth that you want, you pour in concrete down through a steel pipe into the bottom, and it slowly rises and displaces the mud, which is lighter than the concrete, and you will end up with a deep panel of concrete. And you then move immediately to the left or right and do that again, and slowly you can build up a wall, a concrete wall buried in the ground, or in this case, two circular walls to form shafts. This was part of a wastewater treatment scheme. Here are the shafts after they were excavated. But our problem is with one of the panels that is here, which sort of was immediately in between the two shafts. When they started to excavate it, they immediately found there were terrible problems with this one panel. Some of the concrete was very poor quality, and in some places the concrete was pretty much missing. There was just sort of dirt and mess in there. And the problem they found persisted all the way down the panel. This is the front and the back of the panel, which you could look at from either shaft. And you'll see it's really from right at the top all the way down to the very bottom. And so here they are halfway down, digging out that damaged concrete, and they had to replace it pretty much by hand, which was a slow and expensive process. And here they've finally got pretty much down to the bottom of the shaft. There's still two guys there working away, cutting out damage in that, well, cutting out bad concrete and replacing it. And so they said to the insurers, please, Mr. Insurer, would you pay us for repairing our panel? And so we got a specialist involved, and he looked at all the records and he said, guys, after you dug out that panel, you kept it full of mud for many days before you put the concrete in. That's really bad practice. You're supposed to concrete as straight away, as quickly as you can. You didn't keep the mud in good condition. The mud was in very poor condition. And if you do those things, you will have problems. And the insured said, no, we had an accident here, because when we were concreting, and when we lowered the steel pipe down to deliver the concrete, we lost the bottom part of the pipe. It snapped off, and it's still down there somewhere, but it messed up the concrete. And our expert said, well, that's all very well, but what you've got is damage all the way up the panel. If what you're saying is correct, you might have had a problem at the bottom of the panel, but not all the way up. What you've actually got is the fact that the soil and the mud started to combine to make big, soily, muddy lumps. And those are so heavy they couldn't be displaced as the concrete rose. And so you got soily, muddy lumps in your concrete. And so the insurer said to the insured, Mr. Insured, you never made a good thing that got damaged, which is the only thing the policy can respond to. You made a bad thing. It was always defective. There was no change once you'd constructed it, and the policy doesn't respond to that. And again, you can imagine these were not easy discussions to have. The final example I'd like you to consider is a slope failure. And here again, we have a simple CAR policy, but it raises questions about defect and design, and perhaps also professional indemnity policies. This was a motorway, and this they made a cutting for the motorway here. You see they've then finished building the road. They had a slope on this side and a much higher slope on that side, and they've had this rather dramatic slope failure, this landslip that occurred one day without any warning. And if I show you a cross-section now of what happened, this was the surface of the ground originally, and the designer said you must make an excavation along this red line here, which they did. However, what nobody had realized was the ground conditions, the strength of the natural ground in this area was quite low. And so it failed along this surface here, and all the soil and stuff slumped down into the cutting like that. And so they registered a claim. Now, the insurers said to them, what's your solution to all this? And they said, well, we realize now that the soil is so weak in this area, we're going to have to cut a much flatter slope here, which is what they did. So the insurer said, okay, but please understand, your policy covers your works. At the time that this occurred, your works were what you had done. You had cut the soil out to this profile. Beyond that profile is natural ground. You didn't make that, God made that. It's not part of the contract works, and we don't insure it. And they said also, we don't insure you to build what you should always have built at this location. If you want a motorway right here with this kind of ground, you're always going to have to build this much flatter slope. However, they said, you do have cover for debris removal, which covers the cost of removing the debris that has come into your works. So it will pay for that volume of earth there that has moved into what were your works. Now, arguably, you could say that actually that volume of soil was part of this whole volume of soil that they should have removed in the first place, and why should insurers pay for that? But the insurers said, no, okay, we have a debris removal clause. This thing has happened. We will pay for that much. And again, you can imagine people are very unhappy. But it raises a very interesting question, because you then have to consider, what if the designer of this slope had been negligent? He hadn't done enough investigation, or he'd done the wrong design, and that's why this failure had occurred. There would quite possibly be a negligence claim against the designer, and his PI insurers would be involved. But please consider that his PI insurers would say, you always had to build a flatter slope at this point, and therefore we don't pay for that. That's a cost the project should always have been facing. However, if as a result of this accident it has now cost you more to create that flatter slope than it would have done if the accident hadn't occurred, we will pay that difference in cost. So you can see that even where you may be able to turn to a different policy to look at a particular problem, not everything may be covered even in that situation. That's all I'm going to say at the moment. There are going to be questions later, and now I'm going to hand you back because Claudia is going to discuss the legal implications of policies and construction projects.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me on board. And I am very pleased today to share with you our views and thoughts based on our experience in the region and major construction disputes. And I would like to thank Francis for his very interesting presentation, which shows how much insurance and negotiating your insurance contracts are important. To cover all the risks involved and what the valuable added value that insurance can bring on the table. And I'm going to start by giving you the main topics of my presentation. I'm going to start by the nature of the construction claims that construction projects are facing, the disputes and the changes to these claims over the time, the best practices for handling the increasingly complex nature of construction claims and disputes, the key players when it comes to construction claims, the key factors and the recent trends. Regarding the nature of the construction claims and the disputes, we see a lot lately allegations over defective design, manufacture or installation. We also see claims of delay or cost overruns, in addition to cases involving diminished value or even injuries or death. Now, the changes that we've seen in the construction claims are with regards to the nature of the construction claims and the disputes, and the need for experts in the legal and insurance claims and expert services fields to adapt and evolve accordingly. Regarding the best practices for handling the claims, there is currently a requirement for a completely different skill set and level of analysis to achieve resolution and make sense of the various claims that contractors and employers come across. And Francis has given very good examples of these issues. The other key factor is the communication between the key players and the economic realities to be considered when you have a claim, which are mainly the costs for the technical experts and the legal team. Now, the key players when it comes to construction disputes, and again, this presentation is based on if you want, when a dispute has arisen and a claim is sought. So the key players would be the dispute adjudication board, if any, the legal team, the document controllers or experts on document management, the project manager, the technical experts, and of course the insurance or your coverage consultants. Now, when it comes to the DAB, for those of you who are familiar with the FIDIC, the DAB has been introduced in the Red Book, Yellow Book, Silver, and Gold books. Usually when you have a DAB, it provides either for non-binding recommendations to the contracting parties or binding decisions in relation to such matters, and these would be defined usually in the contract. Now, we've seen a lot of contracts where they removed these the reference to a DAB, and this has been prevalent in the Middle East markets, unfortunately. Noting that the DAB has been introduced because a lot of contractors consider that the engineers are not usually impartial because they are being paid by the employer. The other key player would be your legal team, because you need someone with a solid understanding of contracts and the construction practices, and a team that has an intimate knowledge of the applicable legislation and case law when it comes to design and construction. The other key players are definitely, and as it has been very well demonstrated by Francis' presentation, are the insurance, because as you've seen, insurers play a major risks when it comes to the risk coverage, what type of risk is covered, what type of risk has been excluded, and when you have an incident that is covered or not covered, how it should be dealt with. And insurance do give you an insight on how to deal with similar matters and how to interpret it with the real-world experience litigation. The other key player is definitely the project manager, because the better is the project management, the more it helps you with your claim. Also, another key player is the document controller, or subsequently, if there wasn't one, the experts on document management, because these people will help reduce the wasted time, they would reduce the duplicative effort on the part of the team, they help you avoid missing critical pieces of evidence, and they of course assist in having the right document on hand at the right time. Now, the key factors when it comes to disputes. Why do we have disputes? The first question is whether the construction industry has learned anything from its previous experience. Unfortunately, the cases we've seen and anybody else has seen is that the answer is no. Actually, because one of the main leading causes is that the practice is to focus on getting a project started first and dealing with the consequences later. Now, this is very dangerous, because if you learn how to avoid the problems from inception, it will help you manage more effectively your contract and have much less claims at the end. The other leading cause is the failure to take the time to negotiate claims and terms, and the failure to understand the critical nature of a sound contract administration. The better you administrate your contract, the less claims you have, or when you have a claim, it's better to present it. It would be you would have a better way to present it. There's also another leading cause, which is the lack of understanding of human factors that plays into the disputes, which is even more important than the technical issues themselves. And the very important conclusion is that avoidance approaches and assessing risks continue to be the best practice when it comes to construction projects. And I would encourage Seib to have a webinar on if you want, the steps that needs to be taken prior to tendering or entering into project, prior to signing a project. Now, the other key factors, and this is when it comes to resolving the disputes, is the adapting and adjusting the approach to a given situation by actively listening to the opposing parties. The answer shouldn't always be no. When the other party comes with a claim or with a decision, there should be negotiations in a very reasonable manner, because this would help you a lot instead of compiling and adding up all the claims until they explode at the end of the project. It is very important to discuss them throughout the project in a very reasonable manner. The other factor is definitely flexibility, because sometimes you give, sometimes you take, but this would help you a lot instead of being very firm on your position, instead of negotiating it to the best interest of all the parties involved, and mainly the project. The other factor, and this is when we reach the claims, it helps a lot to have contemporaneous documents throughout the project, and not to have to deal with all the claims retrospectively. The contemporaneous documents help a lot, whether the technical team, whether the legal team, whether the insurance. This is very crucial. And we've seen a lot of projects and big projects where this was not really available. And the other also key factor is to follow the contractual procedure and requirements. We cannot emphasize enough on the importance of reading the contract before signing it, throughout the project, and when you get to a claim. Following the procedural, the contractual procedure is crucial for your claims. You cannot change the contract afterwards. You have to abide by what you have executed and what you have signed in order for you to claim later your claims. And I'm going to end with the current trends in the construction sector. The trends recently are we see a lot of more complex project types that involve infrastructure, airports, ports, metros, stadiums, and oil and gas projects in addition to the other ones. And also we see that the stakeholders in these projects are more complex because you see more sophisticated organizational structures involved and different entities coming from different backgrounds and cultures, and also this needs to be addressed. The other trend is even in the insurance market, because when it comes to insurers, you see that these are the entities that are most often end up funding various claims, disputes, and the ultimate resolution. And this was very well explained in Francis' presentation. You also have the insurance policy language, which is evolving in response to new trends. And I'm sure Seib can help in this field. You also see insurance technologies that did not exist before. Particularly, they are enhanced through artificial intelligence, and these become greatly beneficial to the insurers before and throughout, and when you have claims in the projects. Of course, we cannot disregard the e-discovery when it comes to claims, because as various construction technologies are becoming more mainstream, the need for digital forensics and other advanced technologies will become more critical in e-discovery and facilitate more advanced and less costly and risky investigations. Thank you for listening to me, and I'm ready for any questions that you may have. Elias, I think I'll leave it on to you.
Yes, sure. Thank you everyone for listening. Hope it was an interesting session for you. We have received a few questions. You can still continue to post your questions in the Q&A tab on the right side of the screen, and we will we'll post it on your behalf, or I'll read it for you so that we will get clarification from our speakers. The first question I have here is related to both legal and claims. How can we possibly reduce the incidence of claims and disputes in construction contracts? Claudia, would you like to take this question? How can we possibly reduce the incidence of claims and disputes in construction contracts? You need to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Actually, the most important thing, as I have mentioned, is to resolve the claims when they occur, to file them in accordance with the contract, and to be flexible when it comes to negotiations, meaning the engineer should not be stubborn when it comes to his decision, and the contractor has to also be reasonable when submitting a claim. Basically, it all evolves in resolving the claims or the issues that are faced as and when they occur, instead of having them piling up until the end of the project, because the volume of claims that will still be pending at the end of project, and we've seen this a lot, doesn't help neither the claimant nor the respondent. It complicates matter, and whatever each party has tried to save when it comes to cost and money or in time, they will have to incur it triple the time and the cost, if not much more.
Thank you, Claudia. Another question, it's addressed to Asad. It's related to delay in startup insurance. Francis, in his first example, he addressed claims under delay in startup. So the question here is that you have mentioned, or there was a mention of an incident of delay in startup. Is this common in Qatar in terms of incidents, and is this type of insurance common in Qatar? That's the question. Asad?
Yes, thank you very much for asking this question. The first answer to the straightforward, this line or type of insurance is not very common in Qatar. However, it can be arranged as per the requirements of the clients. As we know that the delay in the startup cover is designed to secure the portion of the revenue which the principal requires to service debt and realize anticipated profits. So it provides actually fairly broad protection against the delays arising from the physical damage caused by any type of the peril. Now, from the risk viewpoint, as we know that there are risks associated here and the parties involved. They are the principals and the contractors. And from the contractors' financial risks, we know they can have a revenue loss, they can have accepted amounts payable to the customers or suppliers, they can have cost overruns, and they can have consultant fees which may occur. On the other hand, for the contractors' financial risks, of course, they may have additional cost of construction, material labor, rental or lease expenses, insurance premiums, which can be an extra cost for them, loans to the finance repairers, designs, liquidated damages, and there are so many other associated costs which can have a financial risk for the contractors. So from the both viewpoints, of course, the insurance can cover the principal interest, which can be the loss of gross profit. And for the contractors also, they can cover for the additional fixed cost for the site activity, which can, of course, go with the general overheads and other type of the expenses. So it's mainly some sort of the business interruption or of the loss of profits type of the cover, which mainly contains this one. Yes, this can be arranged based on the special requirements of the customers, but from our experiences, we have not seen this as a common requirement in Qatar.
Thank you, Asad. We have another question addressed to Francis. Is the contractor eligible for suspended work which is not affecting the completion of the project, or probably the handover of the project? Maybe that's the intention. So is the contractor eligible for suspended work which is not affecting the completion of the project?
Normally, I would say not, because it would be viewed as a consequential loss, and mostly consequential losses are excluded. There is cover under certain policies for the increased cost of unbuilt works. So if a delay has arisen due to a covered loss, and as a result, the remaining parts of the works are more expensive to build because you have to do them in a different sequence or something like that, there may be cover available under certain policies. And a number of policies also have an inflation provision, so for the unbuilt section of the works, so that if a delay results in those sections of the works costing more than they would have done originally because the price of steel has gone up or something like that, there is also cover available under some policies for that kind of cost. Does that help?
Great, thank you, Francis. Another question for Claudia. Seek, Claudia, feedback on the most frequent nature of losses in Qatar in construction sector.
Well, yes, that's a very, very interesting question. Actually, I'm going to give an overview. What we see in not only in Qatar, in the Middle East region, is that when there is a project that is offered for tendering, let's say this project should normally take 3 years, you see that the program is for 2 years. And then you see conditions that would normally not seem reasonable. Nevertheless, you see a contractor tendering for this project and accepting the terms as they are without actually negotiating or without looking at what are the real conditions are. So you end up by having a contract, let's say, which is supposed to be completed in 2 years for 100 million. Usually the project ends after 3 years with 500 million in costs. So, and we see this a lot, and most of the claims are of this nature. So the issue is that people has to look at the contracts before signing. They need to ensure that the limitations of responsibilities there, the program of works there, and all the other technical conditions can be met in a reasonable manner. And throughout the project, they need to as I said, look at the contract and implement it in a way that it saves them time and costs. So the major losses are usually from the extension of time. This we see a lot. And from variations in work, whether by omission or by additional works. And there are a lot of defective works that would appear at a later stage, whether when they issue the completion certificate with 10 pages list of snags and other than snags, or thereafter during the defectibility period. So it's a variety of losses that are seen. We've rarely seen a contract that has started and ended with the same contract price that was originally intended for and with the original program of works. So you see a myriad of claims coming at the end. I hope this answers the question.
Yep, great. Thank you. Another couple of questions for Francis. One is, excuse me. Can you give an example of the misuse of a CAR policy to cover faulty workmanship?
The policies, as I've said, usually contain an exclusion for defects, and faulty workmanship can just be another defect. Now, the extent of cover that you can have is dependent purely on how much money you're going to pay for your policy. Some policies have some pretty brutal exclusions. The original Munich Re CAR policy excludes anything that is the consequence of a defect. You can buy policy cover that will cover everything, all the damage that is consequent upon a defect, except for the cost of improving what you had before. And in between, there's any number of positions that you can buy. So yes, a defect by itself is not damage and doesn't give rise to a claim. But if a defect causes damage, the amount of cover that you have is dependent on the exclusion that you've chosen for your policy. Does that answer the question? Elias, you're on mute.
Yeah, great. No problem. Fixed it. Another question addressed to you. Chances of claims with respect to COVID in construction. So have you seen, or what are the chances of receiving claims related to COVID under construction?
Yes, we have seen a number of delay claims due to COVID. And so you begin to ask some very interesting and complicated questions at that point. Is this due to damage? For instance, if we had a loss that had caused damage, and I have a case exactly like this in Northern Europe, immediately before the COVID problem began, the client is saying to us, yes, it would have cost this much to fix the damage, but because we've now got COVID, it's costing that much more. And I think the insurers are quite sympathetic to that. On the other hand, where we have clients saying, oh, we've got a COVID problem, we can't work as efficiently as we used to, the insurer is saying, it's not my problem. You haven't got damage. You're just telling me you've got a problem that making this project more expensive. Without damage, the policy doesn't respond. So I think there are two different aspects of COVID that are involved here. It is important to say that if you haven't got damage, physical damage, the policy isn't going to respond. You may have cover for your workforce and for illness in the workforce. That's not part of the CAR cover, and the CAR insurers aren't going to be involved in that.
Right. Okay. Another question addressed to both to you and to Asad, and it's related to purchasing of delay in startup insurance. So the gentleman who's asking this question is asking whether it's possible to purchase delay in startup insurance after inception of the policy, after startup of the works. So I think there is an obvious answer here, and maybe it should be more related to delay in handover the risk is more in delay in handover than delay in startup. But in any way, Asad or Francis, both, you can, any one of you would like to pick it up, raise your finger so that our producer would rate.
Okay, that is most unusual, but it isn't completely unheard of. But you must understand that the closer you get to handover, the further you are on in the contract, if something goes wrong, there's much more chance of a critical delay. So the later you leave this, the more premium you're going to have to pay, because the less attractive the risk is to the underwriter. So it is unusual, but it can happen. But underwriters don't find it an attractive risk, and you're going to have to pay if you want to buy it.
Right. Okay, next question is to Claudia. You have spoken about lack of understanding of the human factor in relation to legal disputes related to insurance claims. Can you give an example? What did you mean exactly in this particular?
What I meant is that, for instance, in the Gulf countries, you have a mixture of cultures, people from different backgrounds, people from different nationalities. They work in different ways. They understand things in a different manner. So whatever we do shouldn't be taken for granted, because what we consider to be normal for a person could not be normal to the other or acceptable. So there are a lot of factors to be taken into account when you deal. We're talking on the human level and not on the technical level, because it's not all about the drawings and the contract, and a civil lawyer is different from a common law lawyer. The approach is different. It's the same even when it comes to engineers or people working on site, whether you're talking about within the same company and between the key players in a construction site. So what I'm saying is that people need to understand each other better in order to negotiate, because the way you say no in a country is different from the way you say no in another. The way you say yes in a country is different from the way. So this interaction is very important when it comes to countries that involve so much different nationalities and cultures. And this clash leads to a lot of problems that are not resolved, because we have the personal and psychological issues that interfere with the technical claims. And I'm sure that a lot of you who work in the construction or in any other field have experienced this. So there's a misunderstanding that doesn't come in reality from the project itself. It comes from the people who are involved in the project.
Claudia, there's another question for you related to how is force majeure due to the present pandemic situation being treated at the Qatari courts? So is this something you can answer, or this is something that is?
Well, first of all, I need to explain that force majeure is not a defined term in the civil law. Force majeure should be defined in the contract itself, unless you're talking floods, you're talking really acts of gods. But when it comes to the force majeure in specific contracts, a force majeure doesn't apply across the border to everybody. For instance, construction sites of the government kept on working in Qatar. There are other fields where they were instructed to stay at home or work from home. So force majeure is not a general definition. First of all, you need to look at your contract, what it says, and if it defines, for instance, COVID-19 as a force majeure, and then you have to prove that this force majeure has actually affected your work. Francis just gave an example. So you need to prove that it has affected your work. So if you are working, you have your material, you have not been affected, you cannot just claim a force majeure to cover up for something else that was done. So anything you claim has to be proved. Now, when it comes to the courts, it's too soon to say if there hasn't been any decisions, because the courts were, all the hearings were suspended. They were only dealing with matters of urgency. So we still don't have decisions when it comes to COVID-19. We'll probably have some later in 2021, because the courts will resume the hearings on the 28th of June.
Thanks, Claudia. Another question to you. Can the subcontractor collect his dues directly from the client if he completed the works? Can the subcontractor collect his dues directly from the client if he completed the works?
Well, again, we have to go back to the provisions of the contract, because sometimes you see provisions where the subcontractor is strictly forbidden from speaking directly or getting in touch directly with the employer. And if he does, then he will be in breach of his contract. The other way to have a direct, if you want, claim would be through the court, because under the contracting chapter in the civil law, the subcontractor can claim directly from the employer his dues, but this has to be through court. So unless the contract has a specific provisions that would forbid him from talking to the employer, he can, but it doesn't mean that the employer has the obligation or should respond to him directly. Usually they would refer him to his contractor because the relationship was never a direct one.
Thank you, Claudia. A question which more relates probably to Francis as a loss adjuster. The question is, it's understood that claims and variations should be raised as they occur. However, it has been recurrent that a specific client accumulates the notifications and does not resolve the variations and claims until the end of the project. This makes it very difficult to negotiate a figure which covers increased work and deviations. Is this common in Qatar? What is the typical resolution in these circumstances? Does it often go for a arbitration or go legal? Is it clear? Do you want me to repeat? Or you
No, I think I understand exactly what that questioner is referring to, and yes, it is a perennial problem.
Right.
It is a habit of contractors to save up all their claims, contractual claims particularly, until the end of the project, and then have an enormous row with the employer and hope to get a decent deal. If they do that with insurance claims, there's a major problem, because there is almost always a requirement in the insurance contract to notify the insurer promptly, so that the insurer has the opportunity to investigate the claim and check the quantum. If the contractor doesn't notify promptly, he may be in breach of that, and the insurers may be able to decline the claim. More frequently, we have claims that are notified reasonably promptly, but they never present the quantum of the claim until the end of the project, and that can be a nightmare. And yes, that does lead to disputes, and some of them inevitably end up in arbitration or some form of dispute resolution. The courts are, of course, the last choice that anybody, even the contractor, really wants. But if you don't provide the evidence promptly, it will lead to difficulties.
We have been bombarded with questions. I don't think we have the time to be able to answer all these questions. So I'll take a couple of them. One is addressed to Asad. Asad, there is 1 second. In any way, can we buy back consequential loss exclusion under CAR?
It is always can be covered, of course, but ideally it should be covered at the time of inception of the risk. Once the overall cover is being overviewed or reviewed, so at that time, of course, with the full information required and the consequential losses having the overall impact on the projects and the expected business interruption, it can be covered. But in between also, if the client feels any need to cover this one, as Francis already mentioned, this is more connected with the same question. Each risk has its own price, but if it is going to be very much linked with the business interruption, maybe the circumstances can be reviewed. But if it is not that one, of course, according to the situation, according to the progress of a contract, the terms can be determined. But of course, as per the situation, terms can vary. And the cover can also be restricted to different limits as the underwriters or the insurers see feasible for pertaining to a project. I hope it answers the question.
Thank you, Asad. I have a very long question, Claudia, addressed to you. I will read it, and if it's not clear, I can publish it so you can read it. a scenario where you have two joint ventures, joint venture A and joint venture B. They get into dispute who are equally responsible to complete a project. As a result of the dispute, if joint venture A leaves the project and work is taken over by joint venture B, if any claim arises when the work is done by joint venture A partially, and then it was reworked by joint venture B to conclude the damage reinstatement, who will be eligible to get compensation under the policy? Oh. Unmute, Claudia, unmute.
I'm not sure I understand under which policy. I can answer under the contract because the policy has to be defined and the risk has to be defined. In any case, I'll just give a general answer. When it comes to JVs, there are two different contracts. You have the contract with the employer, which involves usually the two JV members, and usually they would be jointly and severally liable towards the employer, which means whatever one of them do, it will reflect on the other. And that is the contract between the joint ventures themselves, because sometimes you have a joint venture where the work is divided due to technical specifications, meaning one JV member has an expertise in one field that the other doesn't have, and the other has an expertise in another field that the JVA doesn't have, and this is why they come together and tender for a project. But again, it depends on under which layer we're talking. Towards the employer, usually they are severally liable towards and jointly liable towards the employer. Amongst themselves, it's the contract. Again, we go back to the contract that should address the situation between them. If the contract is silent, then you go back to the law. So each situation will have specific provisions that would cover it. Again, are they equally responsible or not? Towards the employer, they should be equally responsible. He can go after one or the other or both. That is usually an option when it is a jointly or severally obligation, joint or several obligation. And among themselves, again, you go back to see the contract provisions. And this is why I cannot emphasize enough on how it is important before entering into a project to seek proper legal advice, whether from the legal team, proper advice from the insurer, proper advice from the technical team, if it's not something that the company itself does, in order to avoid all these problems that the contractors or the subcontractors or the employers or the engineers are facing towards the end of the project. We cannot emphasize enough on how much it is important to be very cautious when you enter into the contract and not say we deal with the consequences later, because the consequences are coming at a very, very, very high price, even when they win. Because we've seen a lot of situations where even if you have a moral victory and a sweeping award where they've granted you most of your claims or all of your claims, the other party at the end of the project would either be bankrupt or unable to pay you your dues as that you've been awarded. So this is why it's very, very important to manage the contract at the beginning and not at the end.
Great. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Francis. I would leave the last opportunity to Asad. Is there something you want to add or you want to conclude with?
Thank you very much. Yeah, in summary, the owners need a multiple approach to reduce the claims. In a nutshell, what I would like to say. Such an approach should include, of course, the strategies and practices to optimize the risk allocation, mitigate their losses, and address unwarranted claims. And we know to achieve those ones, the owners should, of course, prepare aggressive targets and bids. They should use contracting strategies such as design, build up, as well as to manage the contract risks. They should refrain from using the contracting process as a means of the shifting risk to the contractor. And there are so many other elements to also understand the site risk and also need to see the strong owner. They need to schedule the controls resources to ensure that there is evidentiary trail is available when there is any claim occur. And of course, the most important thing is to keep the whole record as well as to contain the most frequent status reports to keep with them so that to avoid any loss before it happens. So in nutshell, there is a great need on the contractor's head to overview of the overall progress and to keep it updated so that to avoid all those chances. And where, of course, the insurance company is there. As I mentioned, one of the services we have is a qualified risk engineers, and Seib is very proud of having the qualified risk engineer who can also visit and our clients if they need any services from our sides on reducing or mitigating any future occurring losses. So we can also help, and we can also tell them that how can they minimize the losses. This is what is the general message from our side.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the participants, our clients, our friends and visitors. Thank you, Claudia and Mary Haj. Thank you, Francis Barber and Sedgwick. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And we hope to see you again in our next webinar.